of Yoga.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Today on the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about developing the faculty which receives divine revelation, known as the Christ or Messiah. Listen as we discuss the statement written by Mary Baker Eddy in Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, page 273-18. Man is harmonious when governed by the soul. In this show, we will explain the process of shifting identity from a mental material basis to a spiritual basis by graduating from sense to soul. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and activate spiritual sense. Swami, I see the title of today's show is Gaining the Spiritual Sense of Truth. Sounds like we need to be aware of certain things here. How would you like to get us started?
Let's start with the question Pilate asked Jesus, "What is truth?" This can be an open question for those believing in mortality and two powers, but here we're speaking of the one truth, the only truth, which is the perfection of being, the divine creation. In divine science, there's only one truth, and it is everywhere, always, without opposite. Divine principle is the only self-existent power, the changeless state of being. And I like what Mary Baker Eddy wrote in Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, page 275. Truth, spiritually discerned, is scientifically understood. It casts out error and heals the sick. End of quote. This is why we may want to gain the spiritual sense of truth. And in this show, we'll look at how to graduate from thinking with 5 corporeal senses to knowing with 7 spiritual senses.
So, Swami, you said the one truth, the only truth, is the perfection of being. Now, I noticed perfection and the word being are both capitalized, so we're not talking about human beings. Can you expand upon that?
Yeah, we have to begin to understand life is purely spiritual. Spirit is whole, complete, doesn't have the same limitations as the mental material concept about itself. It really was helpful for me to understand what we learned in Kriya Yoga, the principle of manifestation, how things come into form, come into appearance. In order for something to appear at a corporeal sense level, it has to split from unity, manifest in half, and then leave behind a complementary, unmanifested other part. This is the original Trinity. You've got the mental, the physical, and the spiritual. But as we're learning in the light of spiritual truth, it dissolves the mental material concept, the false sense of existence.
Swami, can you explain more about the concept of duality that we are living in?
Going back to the principle of manifestation, once you understand how things come into form, work with the idea of no halfway measures to spiritual truth. We can't bring forth the divine image with the mind that we are using to get us through this lifetime, simply because it's in half. So how can we use the corporeal sense testimony to be a faithful witness to the divine idea? Start by knowing the difference between thought, which is duality, and idea, which is absolute or spirit. The way that we can do this without falling into a contradiction, tell the truth about the lie and tell the truth about the truth. Shift our lines of demarcation from good and bad, which is duality, and know the difference between what is real and unreal. Anything made by the divine principle cannot die. It can't change. And anything showing in our corporeal senses which changes cannot be made by the divine principle. So we treat things differently. We know the difference between what is real, held, controlled, and governed by the divine law of absolute eternal life, and what is temporary. And you never want to confuse the two. That was what was called sin, missing the mark. So anytime we think the unreal is real, we're living in sin in this model.
Swami, so we know that spirit is changeless. However, as we increase our levels of awareness and levels of consciousness to rise above the mortal sense, our physical world around us does seem to change. So can you explain how that happens?
Yeah, see, we use the testimony of the corporeal senses as the check engine light on the dashboard of consciousness. What appears in the corporeal senses is never real, but it is very useful. When I do Kriya Yoga asana postures, I use a mirror. The mirror is a wonderful tool because it enables me to see if my back is straight, shoulders are level. Now, I know the image appearing in that reflection isn't real. Therefore, I don't try and make the adjustments at the mirror. The same is true with graduating to a more spiritual sense of identity. You know the physical form on earth is no longer real to you. The only thing that is real is the divine truth. The divine principle is running a perfect universe. What I have to do is rise out of a false sense of self under the government of karmic law, or at least appears to be under the law of karma, and now identify with myself as the one body, held, controlled, and governed by the divine law of absolute goodness. And to develop the faculty that will enable us to perceive the divine creation, we have to take the necessary steps. In Science and Health with Key to the Scripture, Mary Baker Eddy writes, "Without a fitness for holiness, we cannot receive holiness." That's on page 15, lines 31 to 32. Before we can walk reason, this human concept, through the open door of revelation, we have to master the mind-body complex. First, we must be able to separate from the pattern that comes in with the physical body. And then we have to develop human intelligence. And then we have to overcome the world mind to receive divine revelation.
So now let's talk about this next passage from Science and Health, page 16, lines 20 to 23. I'll read it. "Only as we rise above all material sensuousness and sin can we reach the heaven-born aspiration and spiritual consciousness which is indicated in the Lord's Prayer and which instantaneously heals the sick." End of the quote. Let's break this down a little bit for our listeners.
What we're starting to see here is the similarities between the Kriya Yoga we teach and Christian Science, because this idea of purification, to be able to receive divine revelation, we have to purify the mind-body complex of all unnecessary dependencies and all erroneous concepts, beliefs, and theories. And these are the necessary steps we have to take if you want to demonstrate divine law with scientific certainty. Spirit is a demonstrable principle. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's right here, right now, functioning.
So when she says, rise above material sensuousness and sin, can we talk about how that happens?
This is where I really like the Kriya Yoga, presented in 8 essential stages. And the 5th stage is what is called pratyahara, sense withdrawal. In Kriya Yoga, you're enlisting strategies. Without going through the whole system, you're employing strategies like skillful use of thought, skillful use of breath, skillful use of water, skillful use of food, skillful use of exercise. Developing psychological organs so you can separate conscious awareness from the influence of the 5 corporeal senses. Yoga meaning union with the divine. Now you disconnect awareness from duality and you rejoin it with the absolute, the invisible, intangible, divine omnipresence. When you do this, you have yoga, but you have changed what it is your physical body, your concept of life is using for validation. This is the equivalent of the Christian concept of to love God. The body comes in with a pattern. It's looking for food, mother, and approval for validation. We have to separate from that connection and rejoin with a more reliable resource. And because this more reliable resource is invisible and intangible to corporeal sense, that produces what was called stillness, silence. And that silence and stillness is the absence of the influence of the 5 corporeal senses, but you have conscious awareness of the divine creation. The next step is where we are activating spiritual sense, which then produces the chemicalization, the changes that take place when we are under the protection of divine law. We're letting the Lord build the house.
We're going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor. Listeners, will be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Theory 1, Human Development and the 8 Essential Stages of Kriya Yoga. This program is a comprehensive course that will help you get your arms around the science of Kriya Yoga. It provides a clear understanding of the goals and objectives behind yoga, along with the physics of spirituality. It includes the practices, supportive concepts of Kriya Yoga, and the process in human development, apotheosis, the process of the human becoming divine. A complete guide on how to become a human in the adult state. Get the light in your soul and experience the simplicity and joy of union with the divine. This course is available in live classes at the ashram or online with 8 videos or 4 CDs. Visit our website, www.ipdtransform.com, for more information. Welcome back. For those who are just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. We're going to continue with some citations from Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures by Mary Baker Eddy to see how she recommends thinking differently. So we're going to begin with one from page 272, and I'll read. The divine principle of the universe must interpret the universe. God is the divine principle of all that represents him and all that really exists. Christian Science, as demonstrated by Jesus, alone reveals the natural divine principle of science. Matter and its claims of sin, sickness, and death are contrary to God and cannot emanate from him. There is no material truth. The physical senses can take no cognizance of God and spiritual truth. End of the quotes. Swami, your thoughts on these?
What she's letting us know and reminding us of is we can't bring forth the divine image with the mortal mind. This idea, the divine principle of the universe must interpret the universe. She calls it to think with God as God. It's when we stop thinking, forming thoughts and opinions with the five corporeal senses, and we make our mind an avenue of awareness for the operations of divine mind. We know there's a difference between thought, which is dualistic, and idea, which is whole, it's absolute. They're two very different functions. And as long as we are able to make that distinction, and we know we cannot bring forth the divine image with the mortal mind, and we stop trying, striving, struggling, seeking, planning, asking, is not the operations of the divine principle. So we rest. Spirit is total confidence. Spirit rests in the knowledge of absolute perfection. This is the peace that passes human understanding. So we let divine mind do its thinking in our awareness. That's the only way of knowing this truth.
I think it's really interesting. She's telling us all discord is contrary to God. And obviously, growing up in a Baptist church, we were taught everything comes from God. This could be a major leap for most people.
Yeah, see, that's what she called pantheism, to think everything is God. And in order to demonstrate divine law, you need the principle and the rule. To have the principle, you must know God aright. To think God is a mix of good and bad, God rewards and punishes, is a contradiction. So you don't have a principle. And then, of course, to understand the rule, you can't bring forth the divine image as a finite mortal being. Like attracts like. We must know ourselves in the way we're known by the Creator, which is spirit. And spirit isn't in half, spirit isn't in form, spirit is whole and everywhere always.
The next citation is from page 103, lines 9 to 17. I'll read it. As in the beginning, however, this liberation does not scientifically show itself in a knowledge of both good and evil, for the latter is unreal. On the other hand, mind science is wholly separate from any halfway impertinent knowledge, because mind science is of God and demonstrates the divine principle, working out the purpose of good only. The maxim of good is the infinite God and his idea, the all in all. Evil is a suppositional lie. End of the quote. So, again, your insights.
As Mary Baker Eddy suggests in Science and Health, mortal mind does not at once catch the higher meaning. We have to educate our thought up to spiritual apprehension, developing a mental landscape that will support the divine idea. Coming out of all of these human concepts, theories, and beliefs that don't support the divine idea become our biggest barrier to knowing the truth. So to simplify it, we have to think differently, graduate from thinking with 5 corporeal senses to knowing with 7 spiritual senses, and we have to take all the necessary steps that would enable us to begin to control how we think, separate from being at our lowest level of consciousness, what she called animal magnetism, where we are hypnotized, instinct, appetite, preservation, survival. And we have to graduate to reason, to be able to think and work with human intelligence, operating mental functions, perception, reason, memory, intuition. And then eventually walk reason through this open door of revelation where we now let divine mind take over the scientific government of the body. It's a process.
I really like this next citation from page 167, 20 to 27. The flesh and spirit can no more unite in action than good can coincide with evil. It is not wise to take a halting and halfway position or to expect to work equally with spirit and matter, truth and error. There is but one way, namely God and His idea, which leads to spiritual being. The scientific government of the body must be attained through the divine mind. It is impossible to gain control over the body in any other way. End of the quote. Swami, your thoughts?
Yeah, this is one of the biggest mistakes in what I call the pseudo-spiritual communities today is we think we can do things humanly and spiritually. Like Mary Baker Eddy said, you can't weigh the human in the same scale as the divine or limit in any direction of thought the omnipotence and omnipresence of God. In order to do this, we can't do it with what she calls a halfway position or halfway measure. Halfway means that you're doing it from the false sense of existence. And in order for us to achieve this, we must put off the false sense of existence.
This last citation that we have is from page 274, 23 to 32. I'll read it. Divine science is absolute and permits no halfway position in learning its principle and rule, establishing it by demonstration. The conventional firm, called matter and mind, God never formed. Science and understanding, governed by the unerring and eternal mind, destroy the imaginary co-partnership, matter and mind, formed only to be destroyed in a matter and at a period as yet unknown. This suppositional partnership is already obsolete, for matter, examined in the light of divine metaphysics, disappears. End of the quote. Show me your thoughts.
To be above all sensuousness and fear, we must understand the unreality of the false sense of existence and know we are the expression of an indestructible principle. Now, it always comes down to me, do I think it was Mary Baker Eddy's idea to protect the milk of Christian Science? What Gilbert Carpenter wrote in Course in Divinity, and I'll read it. In defense of the point of view taken by the board of directors as given in the Sentinel, it can be said that Christian scientists agree with Paul in 1 Corinthians 3, 1-2, that babes in Christ are not ready for meat. They are not able to bear it. The milk or grain of Christian Science for which they are ready is the teaching and practice whereby the power of God is brought into human experience to bless, heal, and purify, to resolve the inharmony and discord of material sense into harmony and health. Beyond this simple healing doctrine is the more profound teaching that indicates the employment of the power of divine mind to eliminate mortal mind or matter in all its phases, to destroy even human harmony in order to replace it with divine harmony. The milk of Christian Science symbolizes the power of God to improve mortal man's dream of existence, a primary step that is necessary to destroy fear and to start him on the road towards salvation. The meat of Christian Science involves the entire dissipation of the Adam dream in order to awaken man to spiritual reality. This further growth demands of man to leave all for Christ. End of quote. Basically here, we have to walk before we can run. We have to come out of the fear. We have to come out of the belief in mortality. Then we have to develop ourselves humanly, develop human willpower, human intelligence. Start to make your decisions based on values that are in accordance with universal order. This is definitely a process. And then I really like what Mary Baker Eddy wrote in Miscellany, page 242, and I'll read it. You are scientifically correct in your statement about yourself. You can never demonstrate spirituality until you declare yourself to be immortal and understand that you are so. Christian Science is absolute. It is neither behind the point of perfection nor advancing towards it. It is at this point and must be practiced therefrom. Unless you fully perceive that you are the child of God, hence perfect, you have no principle to demonstrate and no rule for its demonstration. By this, I do not mean that mortals are the children of God. Far from it. In practicing Christian Science, you must state its principle correctly, or you forfeit your ability to demonstrate it. End of quote. You have to look and see, am I demonstrating divine law with scientific certainty, or am I still believing in duality? Do I still believe in two powers? And unless we are proving the omnipresence of the divine creation, you have to realize you are not conscious of divine truth, and therefore have not developed the faculty that will receive divine revelation.
Swami, what would be your recommendation for us to start gaining the spiritual sense of truth?
Yeah, I would say, depending on where you are, if you haven't separated from the influence of the five corporeal senses, and you don't understand yourself to be one with the divine principle, then you can start by a belief in the divine principle. Start by knowing God aright, that God is perfect, whole, complete, and then maybe start to learn how to control how you think. Start with the relationship between breath and thought. Start working on your value system. Start to know the difference between a need and a want so that you don't have to react as if you're in danger when you don't get what you want. Until eventually you can stop thinking and make your mind an avenue of awareness for the presence of the divine principle. And in that silence and stillness, you watch, you wait, you listen for what will be called the birth of Christ. Christ is the saving aspect of truth. It is what will make the divine creation comprehensive to human consciousness. This is what we mean by activating spiritual sense. And then you no longer have to limit yourself to belief, but your belief in the divine truth begins to demonstrate, because consciousness is experience. We can't demonstrate divine law if we are not conscious of the divine creation.
Swami, thank you so much for your insights on today's podcast, Gaining the Spiritual Sense of Truth. Listeners, be sure to visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. On any of the pages, as you scroll down, you'll see several buttons there that you could press to further your understanding. Swami, your final thoughts about today's podcast.
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and activate spiritual sense. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga realization. Namaste.